Welcome everybody joining us. We're thrilled to have you. We're going to be talking today about the national and local cannabis industry, and IWF is happy to be hosting this group of either IWF members or some of you may be joining from other organizations. I'm thrilled to have you with us. We are going to do a few introductions, but first, here is today's agenda. And I'm part of the communications committee of the IWF Chicago, and I'm told that we had to have a catchier title. So the question is, will the money be rolling into Illinois with cannabis? And hopefully today, maybe we'll be able to answer some of those questions. What we're going to go over today is a state of the cannabis industry nationally, an update on Illinois, and some of the things that we're all doing to help those people who've been awarded licenses. We're going to talk about the talent and educational opportunities and needs in the cannabis industry, maybe more locally, because we're all spending time both locally and nationally, but maybe locally is more of an interest to everyone. And if you could have yourself on mute, that would be great, because I hear it. We're going to hear a little bit more about the consumer perspective and how cannabis really is a CPG engine. There are so many opportunities for consumer products. And at the end, we'll leave some time for questions. So to get started, we'll do some brief introductions. I am Amy Dordek Dolinsky. I am a partner in a recruiting firm called Lucas James Talent Partners, and we do recruiting both in the cannabis industry and outside nationally. I have some interesting background in cannabis, which I'll touch on when I do part of the presentation, but I'm going to hand it over to, I'll start with Jay at the top. Maybe you can do a brief introduction and we can go through introductions and then into the program.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, IWF, for hosting and having us today. Jay Caauwe here, 1/3 of Supercritical. My background is primarily business and product development, focused exclusively on the exchange space in Chicago. Traded for a good amount of years before moving over to the exchange and working on exchange products, business development, global business development as a matter of fact, but saw what was happening in the legal cannabis and hemp space. So through a series of good meetings and good fortune, met with Kerry and Sparky of October of 2019, and knew we had something going on. Looping together our acumens and our skill sets informed Supercritical.
Kerry, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Kerry Jordan. I'm an IWF Chicago member. I'm a former board director of IWF, and I'm currently working on the communications committee as well as the annual dinner committee. Really excited to be here with you today. As Jay said, Jay, Sparky, and I are the co-founders of Supercritical, which is an advisory firm based in Chicago that works with hemp and cannabis companies, both domestically and globally, helping them scale operations as well as strategic development. I'm excited to be here with you today and facilitate a conversation around the state of cannabis, both globally and domestically.
All right, I am next up. My name is Elke Rehbock. I'm a partner at Dentons, also an IWF member. Thank you, Amy, for including me in this. At Dentons, I lead the finance practice, and my own practice focuses in part on cannabis deals, cannabis finance transactions. I represent a number of the debt funds active in that area, which is why I joined the conversation here today. Thank you.
And I'm Sparky Rose. I am the third leg of the Supercritical stool. I started my career about 30 years ago in brand marketing. I've been in legal cannabis for 17 years. Claims to fame in the cannabis space. I was awarded one of the first 4 dispensary licenses ever issued in the United States of America. I co-founded Papa & Barkley, the #1 topicals company in California. Previous chief marketing officer at PharmaCann, a multi-state operator based here in Chicago. and a number of other things in the industry. Love the plant, love the industry, and very happy to be here. Appreciate the invite from IWF and all my fellow panelists.
Thrilled to have you. So let's jump in and start with the state of legal cannabis. And Jay or Elke, you want to take this one? I think Jay, were you going to start here?
No, I was in the second.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Elke.
I think Kerry was going to jump in to give us an overview of the size of the market.
All right, the market is huge. It's and it continues to get bigger every day. Globally, legal cannabis sales are on track to reach about 29.5 billion in 2021 and about 50 billion by 2025. In the US alone, last year, we racked up about 23 billion in sales, and that's tracking to be about 43 billion by the time we get to 2025. North America loves its weed. About 97% of all current legal cannabis demand comes out of North America. So as you can imagine, the opportunities for both ancillary businesses as well as cultivation, distribution, retail is just got still tremendous upside. We're still very early in the process here. Some of the data that we've looked at shows about 268 million people consumed cannabis at least one time in 2020. And of that group, about 44.6 million were based in the US. And if you look at our population, that's really pretty small still. It's just 13.5% of the population using cannabis. So as you can see, as more people get comfortable with it, as people are growing, using alcohol less, there's going to be lots and lots of opportunity to continue to grow that market. I think that currently about almost 240 million people in the US that have consumed cannabis live in a state where it is legally available and they're able to access it. So as we continue down this path, keep an eye out for trends like that, and know that as we get more into it, and I think Jay or Sparky will talk about this in a bit, the way that it can be used. It's not just old school smoking a doobie like 20 years ago. Now there are lots of different form factors. You can use it sublingually, you can eat it through an edible, smoke it, vape it. It can be used in skincare products and all other wellness opportunities. So I think that old school stoner mentality definitely is changing, and we're going to see a lot more emphasis on health and wellness and the therapeutic benefits that we derive from the plant and the different cannabinoids.
And then let me spend just a few minutes as the lawyer on the yes but, or on the explanation on what is hampering the growth for now. In the United States, at the federal level, cannabis is still illegal. For banks, and that goes to my space, that means they can't bank cannabis companies, and it's also leads to anti-money laundering violations for them. The reason we've seen the explosive growth that Kerry was describing is that at the federal level, while legal, we haven't actually seen enforcement against state law compliant licensees or vendors. I'll spare you the details and I'll flip over to the next slide. There's a ton of different guidance on how on the enforcement side. Any questions, reach out separately. That gets very detailed. Some of the implications of the illegality, of the federal illegality. It means that you cannot export and import to or from the United States. I touched on the banking restrictions. And while this so-called SAFE Act, which keeps federal regulators from imposing penalties on banks for working with cannabis companies, is working its way through Congress, we're just not there yet. You also have limited IP protections, again, for the same reason. Those laws the relevant laws there are federal, and what is not federally legal cannot be federally protected. Same on the bankruptcy side. And this to me, again, I don't want to make this about my practice area too much, but as a lending lawyer, how am I supposed to tell my lending client, my lender, that I've got their back if I cannot afford them the guarantees of the US bankruptcy courts, which I would typically in any other deal. Now, we figured all of this out by now. The lenders in the space have gotten comfortable, but it's another example of hampered or something that hampers the growth. And all of that obviously limits access to capital in significant ways. With that, for hemp, the lay of the land is a little bit different. In 2014, the Farm Bill led to the legal commercialization of CBD. And since the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp is no longer a controlled substance. Back to cannabis. The current state in the US is that we've got 37 states and 4 US territories that now have legal medical cannabis. And I'm sure the Supercritical team will talk about that distinction a little bit more at some point. We have 18 adult use states, 10 low THC, and only 3 prohibiting it all together. With that, I'll hand it over to Jay to talk a little bit about all of the ancillary businesses the entire industry touches, to show, again, the breadth of the market we're talking about.
Thank you, Elke. And I think it bears worth repeating, the implications of a federally illegal product are real, and yet we have a very robust and thriving business. The title of the program today is, will the money or will the cash make inroads into Illinois? And the answer is yes, provided that everyone remembers that cannabis and or hemp is much more than a recreational product, right? So I hope that the takeaway for the audience today is that, like Kerry said earlier, this is not a stoner product. This is all about building industries. Some of these industries are the pick and shovels, right? The ancillary businesses. So every cultivator is going to need construction, HVAC, hydroponics, everything that comes with putting in a greenhouse grow, indoor grow, or even outdoor grow. So the amazing thing about the ancillary business of cannabis is you don't have to be a fan of the plant. You may be morally opposed to cannabis, but you understand and recognize there's opportunity to participate in the tremendous growth industry. On the product side, and Sparky will get into that about the CPG, it is a consumer packaged good, right? And it's all about these different form factors and how you get it on the shelves and how you market it and how you brand it and how you package it. That dovetails, of course, with the next step in the process. Once you get it on the shelves, what dispensaries are you going to be working with? How are they going to sell it? How do you enter into those trades in your point of sale system? Anything that electrically connects your product to the consumer needs to be software that has to be implemented into your dispensary. Cultivation, that's right, because cultivations need that seed to sale tracking software as well. Let's go back a little bit more on the cultivation side of the ancillary business. And I want folks to understand that this is more than growing in dirt and growing with water and growing with sunlight. What Supercritical is driven by is a simple premise that cannabis has attributes of disruptive technology, right? So it not only disrupts within cannabis. If you think about what the pandemic did in terms of how people approach their form factors, sharing joints, I think after the pandemic, not after the pandemic, post-pandemic is probably something that doesn't carry as much interest or cachet among a group of people. So the form factors in cannabis have changed to things like edibles, topicals, tinctures. And how do we get to those points? Well, we have to have different technologies that allow for the creation of these different form factors. And that could be through extraction or infusion or ingredients manufacturers. Going back to cultivation, the thing that interesting about disruptive technology is that these applications to grow plants using artificial sunlight or artificial soil translate into other commodities as well. So we have the ability to work with a company that can extract cannabis waste and create a whole new alternative to single-use plastics. That alone is disruptive to legacy industries, let alone disruptive to the cannabis industry. So I think, again, the important thing to remember is that there are many, many, many more opportunities away from plant touching, away from the recreational side, if people remember that we are sitting on top of a commodity who is ready to grow.
Couldn't agree with you more, Jay. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of, and others, please feel free to chime in because everyone on this panel is very close to what's happening in Illinois right now. So happy to have you join me in the conversation. For 18 months, I spent a great deal of time in the cannabis industry in 2019 and 2020. And I was part of over 700 license applications for what are called the dispensary licenses and craft grow. Dispensaries, the 185, I think that number is pretty close, right, everybody? 185 dispensary licenses were recently awarded but not granted, and we don't have to get into that distinction, but they'll be held up for quite a while in the legal process before being awarded to 3 rounds. These licenses were awarded to 3 rounds of lottery winners over the last several weeks. So this is all fairly new. So that represents potentially 185 or less, because some of them are owned by the same people. So multiple people won multiple licenses. But those are new businesses, as are the 60 craft grow licenses that were awarded and granted in the last several weeks as well. And those are small indoor grows, like were mentioned before, all over the state of Illinois that were also granted. So 185 dispensaries will be coming online, hopefully in the next year, and 60 new, probably more than 60. Would you all of you agree? I think there'll be another 60 more, right?
Yeah, well, it's the first round was 40, so 40 have been awarded, and then there is an additional 60 that need to be rewarded before December 21st of this year, and they will pull those 60 from the existing application pool from the first round for 100 total craft grow. There's also 40 and 60 on the infusion side of the house as well for infusion licenses.
So that, and thank you for correcting me, because I've had a hard time just keeping track of what's actually been awarded and granted. But those are, over 200 new businesses basically that are going to be coming online throughout the state of Illinois. So if you wanted a license, so craft grow, those 40 were awarded. Those are people now looking for real estate and looking for all kinds of things, including employees, equipment, real estate, et cetera. And that's really an opportunity for all of you on the phone or on the call today. If you provide services like legal or accounting or real estate, there really is an opportunity for you to start serving this population of new business owners, some of whom have lots of experience, some of whom don't. And as a result of that, like my colleagues on the call here, we a couple of us decided to create something called Cannabis, because probably like my other panelists, I'm getting lots of calls for, can you help me with? I want a license, I'd like to sell it. I want a license, I want to build it. I'm looking for funding. And, I'm in business. We didn't want to do all of that and take all of our time for free. So we created a little ecosystem to try to match people up with the services they were looking for. And frankly, one of my motivators is to see some of these social equity applicant and veteran teams get their businesses up and running with the right partners and do what the state intended, which is to get minorities, social equity, veterans, more than just the existing, what's called MSOs, multi-state operators, up and running. We want to see all of these entrepreneurs matched with the right providers and get their businesses online. So that's something I've been involved in over the last couple of weeks. So I'm really excited about connecting people to other great people in this space. And I will now pass it. So that's the state of Illinois, which is a moving target and kind of quite involved. I think some of it will be over the next couple of weeks and months playing out through some lawsuits. But I'm going to hand it to Jay now to talk about job opportunities and some of the educational opportunities.
Thank you, Amy. This kind of dovetails with what we talked about before on the picks and shovel ancillary side. It is important to note that the major universities around the country are doing programs around cannabis and hemp, but I think it's really important to kind of hone in on what's going on locally, especially with the city colleges of Chicago. Olive Harvey and Wilbur Wright in particular have recognized that cannabis goes beyond that plant-touching recreational product. And they are developing programs that involve greenhouse production. In fact, over at Olive Harvey College, I think there's a 1,000 square foot hemp room that's being put in. The floor has been laid, and I think the first plantings will occur before the end of the year. So there's going to be greenhouse production. There's going to be focused on greenhouse environment, plant production, pest management. There will also be a hemp and cannabis equity class. It's going to talk about hemp and cannabis history in America. It's a very complex and very inequitable consequences that came out of this emerging cannabis revolution, and part of the course will discuss that. Olive Harvey is also going to look at horticultural business and entrepreneurism, hemp research. So it goes beyond all of these aspects of being a recreation, hands-on, dispensary-only kind of opportunity. When we talk about the degrees, yeah, I can't emphasize enough the need for this industry to have more people that understand the molecular components of cannabis, people who are going to take the time to really dig down deep into the genetics of the plant, because we've really not scratched the surface in terms of the medical efficacy around the plant, around the minor cannabinoids. So I think time needs to be spent on developing the trials and researching more about the efficacy around these other cannabinoids. Hemp on its own should be listed as unlike any other commodity, or not unlike any other commodity. Corn, wheats, oats, or soybeans. It is a tangible textile. It has hedging applications. So I think hemp offers the safer path into a marijuana-based opportunity. So those who want to get into this growth industry could be looking at hemp as a way to end up in an eventual cannabis or / marijuana job. But I think the emerging degrees around agriculture, ag science, healthcare, again, the efficacy of the plant, there's going to be a lot of jobs. And remember, it's the students of today that are going to lead the industry of tomorrow. And it will be the MSOs and the other companies out there who need to draw from this talent pool. So we encourage all of the educators out there to consider programs that expand and go beyond plant touching and recreational dispensary attributes of the plant.
That's great. I just want to add one thing. The job opportunities, this cannabis is not safe from overall labor shortages, but for the companies that I'm recruiting for, the standard jobs are also in high demand. Accounting, legal, marketing. We're seeing lots of opportunities across the country for those typical jobs. People with CPG experience, and Sparky's going to talk a little bit more about this. There's a lot of opportunity for talent from the traditional CPG industry to get into this space. I don't know if others would agree or disagree, but I do think with 185 or all the numbers I said for dispensaries and craft grow, the job opportunities in Illinois are going to be really strong. All right. And that leads to Sparky. You can talk about the consumer aspect.
Sure, happy to. First, let's do a little level set for folks who may not be super familiar with cannabis or the cannabis industry. First, a little bit of nomenclature. Cannabis, hemp, marijuana, CBD. Let's just talk about those things. So cannabis is a genus of plant. Anything, whether it's hemp, whether it's marijuana or otherwise, everything is cannabis. So that's kind of the top of the hierarchy. Everything is cannabis. Now, in the United States, we've separated for legal purposes cannabis into two things: hemp on one side and marijuana on the other. In the industry, we're not wild about the term marijuana. So you'll hear most people still use the term cannabis, which probably adds to the confusion a little bit. But when people say marijuana, what they specifically mean is any product that is derived from a cannabis plant that has more than 0.3% THC in it. Anything that has less than 0.3 THC, and if I'm being really specific, it should be a cannabis sativa plant, then that is classified as hemp. And so the difference between the two is hemp, no THC for all intent and purpose. Marijuana, yes, THC. If you're not familiar with THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, it is the compound of a group of compounds called cannabinoids that obviously appear in cannabis. THC is the compound that typically gets you high, that most people know. And then CBD is the other, what we call major cannabinoid, meaning it's very prevalent in the plant in high concentrations. And it is not intoxicating. Some people say it's non-psychoactive, which isn't 100% true. It is psychoactive, but it's more of an anti-anxiety. It kind of calms you down, and is actually a good way if you intake too much THC and you want to try to bring your high down. If you can take in a bunch of CBD, that will help counteract the effects of THC. So that's just the general language we're going to use here. Most people, or I should say, cannabis, as Jay alluded to, we consider it a disruptive technology. It touches a lot of industries and will disrupt a lot of industries: bioplastics, biofuels, building materials. I could go on and on. It's really a magical plant in every sense of the word. But what most people like to talk about is what we call the cannabinoid economy, or basically selling molecules, selling THC, CBD, and minor cannabinoids, which are other compounds with lots of letters that come up in much smaller quantities in the plant. And so that's what I'm going to talk about mostly, because that's the CPG side of the business, or consumer packaged goods. And so as you can see here on this slide, there are countless form factors that cannabis is currently available in: edibles, vapes, pills, loose flower, probably the most common and most prevalent, on down the line to transdermals, sublinguals, suppositories. The list goes on and on. And then in each one of these form factors, the proliferations of different types of products for different types of functions. This is going to be a humongous industry. And, people should also not get hit with the fear of missing out. There is a ton of FOMO in this industry right now. And what I like to tell people is, we're not even at MySpace. We're like in Friendster territory. Facebook is way down the line. We are not even close to anything that you've got to worry about. There are so much opportunity in cannabis. The easiest way to describe how much opportunity there is: if you're here in Illinois, roll into a Binny's. If you're anywhere else in the world, roll into your local liquor store and look at all the products. And then walk into any cannabis dispensary and compare the selection, and you will instantly realize that we are nowhere near where this industry is going to be. So there is tons of opportunity in the cannabinoid economy around marijuana, hemp, and CBD products. Now, if you look at the total market today, there's a couple very interesting dynamics that you'll find. And part of it was actually brought upon by the industry itself and the operator's general lack of experience with the product. And without getting too much into the weeds, basically most operators in cannabis took a field of dreams approach. If you build it, they will come, where the key was get a license to operate. As soon as you get that license, we're going to throw up a warehouse, put some lights in it, put some plants in it, and we're ready to go. And they're off and running. That is akin to starting a manufacturing company, building your factory, and then looking at each other and say, okay, are we going to make cars? Are we going to make stools? Or are we going to make food? And then figure out what you're going to do with this giant factory. It's not how it's meant to be. You really should look at who are your consumers, what do they want, and then build a factory to make that thing. And that's really one of the main differences between CPG companies and other companies. At a CPG company, you must have an unrelenting focus on your consumer, period, above anything and everything else, above your manufacturing, above your cultivation. It is, what does the consumer want? What are we going to promise them? And how do we fulfill on that promise? And if you're not doing that, you are not long for this industry. And that's why there is still more opportunity, because as Amy can attest to, because I know she's worked at a couple of MSOs, as have I, they still don't get it. They just don't get it. They don't hire the right CPG people in the C-suite. And when they do, they typically pretty much kneecap them. And most of the shots are called by the CEO and the COO. And the result is not great products, and an industry that will be disrupted again once we get some intelligent players actually into the market, which really is what makes what's going on in Illinois today and all these new businesses coming up extremely important. I was on a team that put in for licenses. We had perfect scores. We didn't win. So we came up with nothing. And yeah, that really hurts. You'd like to win. But now the focus, myself and the focus here at Supercritical, and obviously what Amy is working on, is operationalizing these licenses in Illinois. The most important thing we can do for the industry is to encourage more participation, obviously with social equity folks. But if I'm being honest, anywhere and everywhere, we need to grow this industry in order to drop some of the stigmas, in order to affect positive change legislatively, and so then we can affect positive change in our communities with great businesses that offer amazing opportunities, career opportunities, job opportunities, tax bases for areas that otherwise might not have funds for various social services and projects. It's really important that we all come together in the industry and help get more individuals involved in the industry.
Sparky, I have a quick question, and maybe others are wondering this. Today, what is the most popular product in the cannabis space, the marijuana space? And then what do you think it will be in the future?
That's a great question and very interesting, and there's going to be a lot of opinions. Today, flower is still king, no matter how you look at it. If you look at any market, mature or otherwise, flower typically hangs around high 30s, 40% of all cannabis sales in any given market. So flower is still king, but typically when legalization first hits any given state, your flower sales are in the 70 to 80% of the market, and then over time they'll come down and settle in around that 40% area. And so when it goes from 70 to 40, where do those percentages go? A lot of them go into concentrates, so whether it's vape pens or other concentrates, and then a lot go into edibles as well. Edibles because it's not smoking. So obviously there's flower is typically for smoking or vaporizing. Most people smoke, and smoking is generally understood to be bad for your health. And if you look at the wellness side of cannabis, doesn't really jive with wellness. So people, will move over to vaping, but typically after cannabis enters into a market, people kind of get wise to new form factors and will move into things that aren't necessarily flower. As for the future, I think most people who got involved in the industry or who've been involved in the industry, I'd say that we all thought that the vape pen was going to be the silver bullet to mainstreaming cannabis. It's very discreet, it doesn't smell, it's non-smoking. A lot of people thought that that would be the angle to get to, and I really hate it when people say this, but this is what they say, the Chardonnay mom, which is bullshit when it comes to segmentation, but we won't get into that. But everyone thought they thought the vape was going to be it. But I think, although I'd say it was fairly well contained. The vape crisis that happened about 2 years ago with vitamin E acetate, I think really put the screws to that being sort of our mainstream. And since then, a lot of people have looked at edibles. The issue with edibles is they have a very slow onset time and don't necessarily have the most precision dosing available with the current manufacturers that manufacture edibles. So it can have some unpredictable results. And if for anyone who doesn't know anything about CPG, if you're in the CPG business, consistency is king. Just like the food business at McDonald's, you know, a quarter pounder's got to taste the same. When you take, you know, cannabis product X, it's got to affect you the same way every time, or you're no longer going to be a customer. So, you know, when you're looking at future products, technology is going to come into play. Right now, various technologies like nanoemulsification have allowed for more control of onset and offset times for non-smoked or non-inhaled cannabis. And so, and where that largely has come in, it does happen it is used in a lot of edibles, but right now beverages is really where it's
Yeah,
hitting.
I was going to ask you about beverages, Sparky.
Yeah, I mean, so nanoemulsification is a technology that allows beverages to be possible. Cannabis extract is an oil, it's hydrophobic, it doesn't mix with water just like any other oil. So if you try to make a beverage and you add cannabis oil to it, it's just going to separate. And so the way you stop that is you encapsulate the cannabis oil in a lipid or a fat, which is water, not hydrophobic, it's water compatible, as we call it. And so nanoemulsification, that's what we do, except the particles that we're encapsulating are nano size. And so that allows them to pass through the blood barrier much quicker than otherwise they would. And so it basically avoids metabolization through the gut. When THC is metabolized through your gut, it turns into 11-hydroxy-THC, which has a much stronger pronounced effect and also has much more of a body effect than a cerebral effect. And it can be very uncomfortable for some people, but it's awesome for pain management. When you use nanoemulsification, it never really gets to the gut. And so it goes straight into your bloodstream. It has much higher bioavailability and it onsets faster. So if I drink a cannabis beverage, I'll start to feel it in 20 to 30 minutes. Whereas if it was in a cookie, it could take an hour and a half to 2 hours before I start to feel anything off of that cookie. And so that sort of onset, and then it typically offsets much quicker as well. It dissipates, is something that we're seeing that consumers appreciate a lot more. It's more predictable. Wana, which is a large, probably the #1 edibles manufacturer in the world right now, they have incorporated, it's not a nanoemulsification technology, it's a different technology from a company called Azuka that basically binds cannabinoids to sugar, and they use that to make their fast-acting edibles, has a much faster onset. I think you'll see more of these fast-acting products hitting the market, and I think they will have a significant impact on consumption patterns and usage, and I think they will be pretty much what mainstreams cannabis, either the beverages or the edibles. I'm a huge fan of beverages. You'll find nobody who's more into cannabis beverages than me right now.
That's great, Sparky. Thanks. So I thought we would open it up to questions and see, you know, for those on the phone, if you're involved in the industry, if you just want to learn more about the industry, if you want to know, is there an opportunity for what you do in the industry, please join in. You can put your question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
I mean, we are just that good, aren't we?
Yeah, somebody's coming off of mute. Here we go.
Dan Smallsoff here from West Central Illinois. Sparky, spoke with you there a few weeks ago. I appreciate the insight today, and I appreciate the panel having this. We're a family farm down here in West Central Illinois, and we're in line for a craft license and some others as well. But I just wanted to make note that if you are, or anybody you know is having trouble with some property for a craft infusion, etc., we've got property available.
Thanks. That's awesome.
Thank you for letting us know. We appreciate that.
Yep. Nope. I appreciate you guys doing this, and the more information that can get out there, the better, because unfortunately we all know how the state's been clammed up, and it's just tough to know where you've been for the last year or anything moving forward for that matter. So this is great, just to inform people about your opinions and get information out there. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. I am curious, Elke, if you could talk about lending. And so there are going to be a lot of teams out there looking for money. And I don't know who else on the phone is in the lending or real estate space, because there is going to be a demand for money to help them build. So for real estate first, maybe, and second, also to build these facilities out, lending for the build out as well as equipment. What's the landscape like there, and what is the opportunity maybe for some Illinois providers?
Sure. So it's interesting, and let me take a little bit longer way to respond to your question. Typically, if you're a growing business, you find either family and friends, and once you're past those, you go to a bank. For the reasons that we described before, that doesn't quite work this way. And there's this entire industry that has developed around this, where there's a ton of family offices. So the investment arm of wealthy families, or a few families put their money together that have focused on investing in cannabis. And so that's one avenue of getting money. The problem for the average person trying to raise a business is getting access to that. It's like, how do you meet these people? How do you, because it's different. You can walk into a bank branch and you'll be guided from there. This is a much more opaque market. Now, it isn't to Sparky, Jay, Kerry, Amy, and me, but it is to many, many, many people. I think, Amy, your contribution with Cannabis will be really, really great there, right? Because you can make part of those introductions. And that's quite frankly, most of the calls that I get. And I get them from both sides is, have you guys amongst your firms seen businesses that need investment? And our smaller company clients called and say, where do I find the next money? So it's the challenge there is finding the right contact to finance you. The more you're into the industry, the easier that will be. The fact of the matter is interest rates are still high, which is why family offices are into this business. It's a really good rate of return. They used
because it's 15 to 20%, right? That's the percentage of that they're charging right now, right?
It used to be at 20. It's come down, and depending on what's going on a little bit in the market, it's I'm getting distracted because I'm seeing something in a.
Yes, Amelia's with the Women's Business Development Center, and she's obviously involved. Amelia, would love to hear from you if you take yourself off of mute.
I was going to say, maybe we hear that out, because that sounds like a wonderful.
So because of all the issues you've discussed, the state of Illinois has funded the Women's Business Development Center to help particularly social equity participants in this business. And we have, at no cost to the participant, we have a multi-week curriculum that's focused exclusively on cannabis, as well as we have subject matter expertise on staff to work with these entrepreneurs. So we work closely with the state. We know when the licenses are issued, and particularly because of our micro lending program, certainly we have limits as to what we can lend, and depending on where they participate in the cannabis business, we can make loans up to $50,000, and the interest rate can vary between 8 and 9%, which is high relative to current interest rates, but very low given other alternatives that these entrepreneurs would have. So please feel free to call me directly. We have we work with a lot of consultants, but we have 40 full-time staff in 8 offices. So we would be very happy to help any of you.
That's so interesting. Amelia, I had no idea. I'm so glad you joined today. Well, most people will need a lot more than 50,000.
Right, I know, but that's
still very helpful.
Yeah, and we do try to work with other providers of capital that can augment. It's always helpful to have us participate in the transaction, even though our ability to fund it has extreme limits. When we participate, it gives the alternative providers of capital a comfort that we've worked with the client. So thank
That's
you,
great.
Amy,
that's
for
great. I'm
letting
so
me
glad.
share this information.
And more sharing I can do for you. So that's great. For others on the phone, I see people who are in training and talent and real estate. You know, did you join us today because you were interested to hear more about how you could participate in this economy? I'm happy to share more if we can. And somebody's asking if we can get a list of the participants because there's a lot of great information. So sure, happy to share that.
Piggybacking on some of the things that were said before, more so than any industry I've ever been involved in, the cannabis industry is really, really, really built on personal relationships. And I think this is a bit of a holdover from the illicit nature of the business. Back when, before cannabis was legal in the US, most of the operators were obviously operating either in the black market or perhaps, you know, the gray market. And that's where a lot of the knowledge of the cannabis industry lives. So when you start to pull these, when you start legalizing cannabis, you've got to pull all that knowledge from the illicit industry into the legal industry. And when operating in the illicit industry, anybody you work with, you're trusting them with your life, your safety, perhaps your property, because it's illegal. They could call the cops on you. They could tell someone else about your grow. It could get robbed. There's a lot of bad things that can happen. And so you really had to know the people you were working with. And I think some of that's carried over to where now, you know, it's a very small industry, and you really need to know people. So if you are looking for funding, if you're looking for expertise, if you're looking for a job, I can't stress the importance of networking. And there is no shortage of cannabis events you can go to. Rest assured, there are cannabis events every single day of the week, online and offline, that you can go to and meet other people either in the industry or people who want to get in the industry. And so I highly, highly advise you to do so. If you're here in Illinois, the two probably main sort of events that run around Illinois. Illinois Women in Cannabis is probably the #1 organization and event thrower, followed by Green and Shy / Tony P's. Green and Shy, it's just another networking event, but there's more than a few that happen here in Illinois, and you'd be well served to check them out.
And somebody asked in the chat, how long will the lead time be to get the new 200+ business licenses online? 1 year or more or longer than that? I would say it will take, you know, several months, that's for sure, but they have to be awarded first.
Right. So basically the awards have to happen. People have been notified that they've won, but due to all the court cases and stuff flying around, they haven't actually issued dispensary licenses. The Department of Ag licenses have been issued. So craft grow and infusion licenses, those are in hand today for the first round. And so, hold on, we'll sip the water.
Yeah, I think my understing is like doesn't it take about 6 months to get something like this up online?
The CRTA has basically said once you're awarded a license, you need to be operational in 180 days. And that's for all licenses, whether you're a craft grower or a dispensary or otherwise. The fact of the matter is that that's simply not going to happen. Partially because of COVID, but also just the way the licensure was set up in Illinois, particularly on the dispensary side, you weren't required to apply with real estate in hand or secured real estate. So everyone who wins a license, who has been awarded a license, everyone's scrambling to get their dispensary real estate. Most people couldn't afford to hold on to real estate or didn't own real estate that's already zoned properly for a dispensary prior to putting in their application. So there's a mad dash out for good real estate. And knowing that most people don't have real estate, the state also understands how difficult zoning is in this in this place, and that zoning alone can take, if you have to rezone a piece of property, that could easily take you a year just to rezone the property. So basically they want you up and running in 180 days. But the fact is, as long as you're showing progress towards opening, you can breeze that deadline and they will give you an extension. What they don't want to see is 6 months after you've been awarded the license, you're standing there with a piece of paper saying, I'm still trying to raise money. That's not going to fly with the state, and they'll revoke your license. So they just want to see progress. As far as how long it'll take, to stand up a dispensary, probably takes 6 months, give or take. And I'd say right now it's probably a little longer because of supply shortages due to the supply chain, the global supply chain issues, whether it's, wood or microchips, they all affect all industries. So I think that's going to slow construction down a little bit. And sort of the dearth of real estate that you can use in this state that meets all the criteria of the CRTA is also limited, particularly in Chicago Naperville BLS district. And so I think that's going to cause other delays, people trying to find the right real estate and or getting it zoned. And then craft grow, it's going to be at least a year from the day that they get the license before you're going to see the first bit of weed come out of there, at least a year.
Somebody asked in the chat, what are some of the key differentiating factors we've seen between the Midwest region's experience with cannabis and then other parts of the US?
Wow. How much time do you have?
Yeah, right. I don't think we have enough time for that. I would just say
I don't think so either.
Yeah, Illinois was trying to be this sort of, unique, get things right, do it, in a way where, trying to right the wrongs of some of the other states, and it didn't quite work out that way. So while I think the best of intentions, I would say they had the best of intentions, it didn't quite work out that way. And just so most people know, like a lot of the winners of these rounds of licenses were people who stuffed the ballot box with 75 or fewer, but more than, a couple licenses to win. So you see, and if you read a publication called Grown In, which talks about this almost every day, a lot of the winners are associated with existing larger, what are called again, MSOs, multi-state operators. So that's something, maybe that's not unique to Chicago, but it's like that, vote and vote often. I feel like that kind of mentality was applied to the cannabis dispensary lottery rounds. But what else would others on the panel say is different about the Midwest experience versus the other parts of the country?
The Midwest, as much as you'd like to lump them as, hey, what's going on in the Midwest, the laws in each of the states that have any sort of legalized cannabis in the Midwest are really quite different. So it's really hard to lump them all in. If we're talking about Illinois specifically, the fact that we're a limited licensure adult use state, and I think we're the first limited licensure adult use state, is a huge difference between Illinois and say your Colorados or Californias. My opinion is that ultimately that limited licensure approach is what doomed social equity cannabis in Illinois. Their heart's in the right place, make no mistake. And I understand the amount of work that was done at the state level to get the CRT passed. They had the very best of intentions, just not the best execution. And as much as I'm sure a lot of people would like to point to COVID and a bunch of other things, this thing was headed this direction before it even started. This was going to happen no matter what. Because of, in my opinion, limited licensure. Most states, when they approve adult use cannabis, they drop merit-based applications or limited licensure. That is a competitive landscape for licenses. They move it into standard business licensing, similar to if you were going to get a license for, say, a liquor store or a hair salon. Here's a bunch of criteria, tick off all the boxes, here's your license. And that's how most other states deal with adult use cannabis. Illinois decided to keep what we do in medical, which was limited licensure, only X number of dispensaries, X number, and everyone's going to compete. With competitive forms of licensure, the problems you have are, one, scoring is going to come into question. And if it's subjective, you're begging for lawsuits. End of story. And it's happened in virtually every state that has done it. And we still haven't managed to fix that for whatever reason. And then the other thing is it artificially inflates the value of the licenses. Everyone thinks a dispensary license in Illinois is worth $10 million just as a piece of paper. Why? Because there's only going to be 300 dispensaries in Illinois. Let me give you a little perspective. Colorado has 700 cultivation licenses, around 700 cultivation licenses and around 600 dispensary licenses. They have about 6.5 million people. We don't have anywhere near that. We won't when we've exhausted all the licenses that we're allowed to give out, and we've got twice as many people. And I haven't even talked about the fact that 85 million people pass through O'Hare Airport alone, forgetting Midway. The amount of tourism and the amount of population, we should have a lot more licenses than Colorado, but we don't. And that's why everyone thinks these are so valuable. That's why the MSOs have put hundreds of applications in order to try and scoop up all of these social equity licenses. It's why now that they've been awarded, even people who were very interested in participating in this industry have already come out and said, you know what, we're just going to sell this license. It's easier and people are offering us millions of dollars. And then everybody who started who was really into this program is getting very upset because they're like, look, this is just the MSOs coming in. Well, it's a lot of people selling out to the MSOs, but still, it was going to happen because we limited the licensure. We artificially inflated the value of these licenses. And now we have this, pardon my French, shit show we're sitting in Illinois because we didn't stop, model it out and think about it. We rushed this legislation out to be, a tent pole of JB's election, and it was rushing it out that really caused the problem and allowing limited licensure. And I'm off my soapbox. Sorry, people. I love this industry and this plant, and I just had to get it out.
Well, I would say we would love to help each and every one of you if we can, or answer your questions. We've all put our emails in the chat. You can find all of us on LinkedIn. Amelia, I'm so glad you joined to share more about the Women's Business Development Center. That would be awesome to share, with people. I'm guessing you'll help any team, not just women. And please feel free to reach out to any of us.
20% of our clients are male.
Oh, there
Right.
you go.
Thank you for letting us know. That's good to hear.
Any other questions before we let you go for the rest of the day? Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We had such a great group, and we'd be happy to share the presentation with you as well.